Welcome to a counseling skills mini lecture. I'm Dr. Allen, and today we are going to talk about basic reflections. So the plan for the day is we're going to talk about the skill paraphrase as well as the skill of summarizing. So paraphrase. This is a skill where we provide a brief summary of what a client just shared with us. Just a brief restatement in our own words. Now, the purpose of this is to elicit more dialogue from a client. It's really surprising to me and to many counselors when we first start out that just repeating back to a client what we heard does so much. It seems like such a simple thing, and that maybe we need to work harder to get a client to talk. But by just doing this, it really opens up the door in a lot of ways for clients to share more and to even see things differently compared to what they have going on internally. It also helps us clarify facts and checks understanding. So just making sure that we are hearing what it is that they're actually saying. One, that they're communicating it or communicating it well, and two, that we are hearing it accurately. It also shows empathy, that we're able to understand what it is that they're saying. So, how do we do it? It sounds really simple, but it does take a bit of skill to get good at it. You want to start first by listening carefully. This is like I've talked about before, where you are walking on a path with a client and you're watching where we're going, you're paying attention to what the client's pointing out, and eventually you get to a crossroads and deciding what to do and what to say. Now, if you spent that whole walk thinking about what you're going to say when you get to that crossroads, you've missed all of the beautiful landmarks and things that the client had been pointing out. So you won't have anything to say because you don't have any data. So allow yourself to be present, to use active listening and really let go of the reins and just listen. By doing that, you'll have the information you need to use a paraphrase when you get to that crossroads. Now, once you get there, you'll provide a condensed, non-judgmental version of the facts and thoughts that your client shares. Now, condensed, you don't have to say and repeat back everything that they said. If they just went on for 2-3 minutes, that's a lot of information, a lot of things. You don't have to reiterate each step. Just try to capture the essence of what they shared in your own words. You want to make sure that it's not judgmental. You're not putting any blame, both either towards the people in the client's story or the client themselves. And then for the paraphrase, you're keeping it to facts and thoughts. Other skills will dive a little bit deeper. Now, things you want to avoid. You want to avoid parroting, which I'll talk about in a moment. That mental noise, as I mentioned, thinking about what you're going to say, thinking about other things, thinking about your next session, your last session, anything that could come up, thinking about how hungry you are. You want to be present in the moment so that you can be mindful and aware. Now, especially in the beginning, you might start off with some stems, some kind of pre-created stems before you state a paraphrase. And they serve as just a nice little formula to get yourself started until it feels a little bit more natural. So some common phrases might include, so what I'm hearing you say is, in other words, it seems like, correct me if I'm wrong, and that's one where you're making a risky paraphrase. You're not quite sure what they're saying, but you think you got it, and you're opening up the door before it even starts for them to correct you. Same with, let me see if I understand. This is one that I'll use on a client if they've either said something confusing or if they've gone on for a long time, kind of steamrolling me. I might pause them and be like, hey, I just want to pause you real quick. Let me see if I understand what you've shared so far. Okay? It's a nice inviting way to say, I wanna check in. What happened was, and you might lay out the brief sequence of events for something that was major that happened for a client. Or you might draw attention to a client's perspective by saying, so from where you sit, each one serves a different purpose. I like this image here. It's a picture of someone looking into a mirror and seeing something completely different. That's what I like to equate a paraphrase to. A lot of times that I'll use a paraphrase with a client and they'll make a statement like, wow, I've never thought of it that way before. Uh, but I tell them, I'm just reiterating what I hear back from you. It's you're holding up a mirror where they don't always see the thoughts that are going on in their heads. And by you just holding them up for them, it can be really enlightening. It can be really insightful for them to see their own thoughts laid out through your eyes. So here's a brief example of a paraphrase. A client says, I've been working so hard for a promotion, putting in extra hours and volunteering for extra projects, but my boss gave it to someone else with less experience. I'm just so defeated. So notice some of the key content there. You don't have to comment on the promotion, the extra hours, volunteering, and then other people. You just want to capture the essence of the statement. So a good example would be what I hear you saying is that you put in a lot of effort into your work, but your hard work wasn't recognized. And the client will probably respond like, yes, exactly. It's so frustrating, and I'm starting to wonder why I even try. So notice that response. Yes, exactly. That's when you know you nailed it as a therapist. I love hearing that. Like, yes, I got it. Uh, they confirm that you were accurate. And then their next statement is just so much deeper than what it was before. It's so frustrating. So we're getting into a feeling, and I start to wonder why I even try. So now we're looking at behavior and um, kind of maybe an inner dialogue there. So that gives us some more information to grab onto to use for our next statement. So some tips for paraphrasing. As I mentioned before, you don't want to parrot back exactly what the client says. You want to keep it a little bit different, maybe catching on to some key phrases or words that they used. But overall, you want to try to use your own words. And keep it brief. Don't go on and on. And then try to stay on track. You want to generally stay to the last thing that the client said. You don't want to paraphrase something from maybe 5 minutes ago, unless you want to specifically draw attention to that. Then I might say something like, I want to go back a little bit and rewind. You said this earlier, and then blah, blah, blah. Right? But otherwise, for a paraphrase, you kind of want to stay in the moment. Now, if you get lost, sometimes it happens. You might repeat the client's last statement or just try another paraphrase. That's what you can do if you're not quite sure what to do next for a skill. It's always safe to lean back on a paraphrase because then that'll kind of either get the client to elaborate even more, giving you more information to decide on what skill to use next, or just kind of buys you time. The client will confirm yes, but that's giving you a few extra seconds to decide, okay, I'm going to use this other skill next. And then you can use a checkout afterwards where you just ask them to make sure that you're accurate. So you'll say something like, did I get that right? Or is that correct? And it allows them to confirm or deny that your statement was accurate. Another thing that I don't have on here that is a helpful tip is if a client says something like, does that make sense? Or am I crazy? Or that doesn't make any sense. If they start to question the clarity of their statement, I see that as a direct sign for me to paraphrase because what that does is then confirms to them, yes, what they said makes sense, and then I get it. You show that understanding. So that's just another tip. So reasons for paraphrasing. I want to imagine two people, and this is what a miscommunication can look like and how we could fix that with a paraphrase. So in life, two people are talking. One person says triangle. Well, that other person who's listening might be distracted or, is seeing the world through their own lenses. They might hear diamond. It's not very far off from a triangle. It's very similar in shape, but it is still a little bit different. So as they start to prepare their response, which is trapezoid, they're doing that based off of the idea that client said diamond, not triangle. So they respond with trapezoid. And what the other person hears through their own lens and expectations, is circle, leaving them to feel very confused because I thought we were talking about triangles. So, classic miscommunication here. A paraphrase can fix all that. So you have those two people, a person says triangle, and then they hear diamond. Again, they have their own lenses, their own thoughts, so that's what they hear. Instead of reformulating a response to them, they'll instead do a paraphrase. So they'll paraphrase what they think they heard, which is diamond. So they'll say diamond with the checkout, like, is that right? The person will hear that and be like, no, that's not what I was saying. And allow them to, again, try saying triangle and seeing if that clears it up. So that is paraphrasing. Paraphrasing is really similar, yet still different from summarizing. And oftentimes I will see people use a summary instead of a paraphrase, and it has negative effects on the session. So a summary is when we wrap up either a topic or the entire session with 2 to 3 sentences, and that cover the main points of the session. Now, the purpose of it is to transition between topics or ideas by first providing closure to the topic that was already discussed. And it includes typically the content, maybe some feelings or meanings of the event, and then any goals or plans. Now, this is a common mistake that I see, as I mentioned before, where a session is going along, you've talked for a couple minutes about one particular topic, maybe about a client's family, and then provide a very long paraphrase, trying to cover everything, and then that stops the conversation in its tracks. Now, it does that because it's actually a summary. You're summarizing everything, and it indicates of like, all right, we're done with this topic. What else is there to say? And so a counselor in that moment feels kind of, especially counselor in training, will feel kind of like, stuck, that awkward silence. So then they'll ask a question about a completely different topic or an offshoot, right? Because you feel stuck. So be mindful when you're making that decision of it. If you're using a paraphrase or a summary, if you're using a paraphrase, you keep it brief and then you stop, back up, and let the client respond to it before filling it with more and more and more content, therefore turning into a summary and stopping the conversation there. Now, a summary example having all of those components would look something like this. So far, we've discussed a recent argument between you and your wife. You feel defeated and defensive. So those are the feelings. So we have the content, the feelings, by the frequent complaints about your spending. And this is the meaning, leading you to withhold information about purchases you make. You've mentioned this week that you want to try to be more honest with both your spending and about how you respond, about how her responses make you feel. And that's the plan or goal. So there's a difference between encouragers, paraphrasing, and summarizing. And I hope this lecture has helped you kind of see those key differences and how they each have different purposes and do different things to the session. So those minimal encouragers, they keep things moving along. They let the client know that you're listening. Paraphrases help dig a little bit deeper into the content and get a client to discuss more and share more. Versus summaries are just a beautiful way to wrap up a topic within the middle of session, or even to just transition to the end of session. If you kind of feel like you're coming to the end of session, you're not quite sure how to end it, just put a nice little summary there, and it indicates to you and the client that session has come to an end. So that's it for basic reflection skills. If you have any questions, email me, Dr. Allen at lkallen@seu.edu. I look forward to hearing from you. Take care, everybody.